Today, we're going to show you the ultimate AMD PC. This PC here is boasting a 7950X, a 7900 XTX GPU, 3 terabytes of WD Black SN850X SSDs. I know there's a lot of X's in these names. 32 gigs of V-Color RAM, 8 Noctua fans, 720 millimeters of EKWB thick boy radiators, and all the rest of the cooling parts are EK. We've got EK GPU block, EK CPU block, all of the fittings are EK, and this awesome distro plate specially designed for the Lee & O11 Dynamic XL case that is a pump, reservoir, and distribution plate combo all in one. Now, this PC would be nothing without the heart of it, which is an Asus ROG Crosshair Extreme X670E, arguably the best motherboard for gaming out right now on the AM5 platform. Power it all, we've got an EVGA 1300 watt platinum power supply. So we're gonna go through the build process, we're gonna show you some performance benchmarks of it all stock, and then we're gonna show you all the performance benchmarks after it's been optimized and overclocked by Trap Tuning. You can find him on Twitter at Trap Tuning. We've been partnered for over a year on my PC builds. We offer his services on every PC build that comes out of my door. So let's get into the build.
So this build starts off similar to any other build, quickly becomes far more complicated than you would see in any of my other builds. Fitting in the distribution plate, all of those fans, fitting in those radiators, and then trying to get all the cables in there. It quickly becomes a packaging nightmare, and it's not shown on here, but it definitely took a lot of time to finesse all of that to make sure everything fit properly. One really nice thing about this build is this distribution plate sets it up so that you never have more than a single bend on any tube that's going into another component. So what I did was I ordered these acrylic 90-degree pre-bent tubes for this build, which meant all I needed to do was measure and cut them. So here I am cutting some of those tubes and then fitting, recutting, and then placing them into the PC. Once all those tubes were in place, it was time to fill the loop. Thankfully, this distribution plate also has a nice little fill port on top, so we're just gonna use that, open it up, and start putting the water in. What I'm using here is just plain distilled water with a pre-treatment from Primo Chill. I like to use this at the start of an open water loop, run it for about a day or two, then I'll drain that fluid out, and the loop will be ready to have its coolant replaced, which would be good for roughly a year.
So at this point, we have gotten all of our tubes cut and installed. We've pressure tested the whole loop, and as you can see, we've now filled the loop. So we're gonna run our power cables into the motherboard and GPU, and we'll be ready to test it out. power's on to the system. You can see we've got some. These actually have it. Oh my gosh, I didn't even realize that's like an LCD screen. With everything ready to go, we downloaded all of our benchmarks, and we're going to show you guys the results.
So the first benchmark I ran was Cinebench R23. You can see during this that a lot of the cores are running around just over 5 gigahertz, and some are running around 4.9 gigahertz. And then all stock, the final score is 37,340, which is pretty great. Not bad for stock. Next, we ran Superposition, which is a GPU benchmark. You can see that it scored 23,081. This is on the 4K optimized setting, and it averaged 172 frames per second. After we did a CPU and a GPU benchmark, we decided to try out a couple of games. The first one being Fortnite. We played this at 1440p with the settings on the Epic preset. With those settings, we were averaging about 80 to 82 FPS. We then turned down our settings to medium, and we were averaging in the realm of 180 to 185. After Fortnite, we decided, well, what do we play the most? Play some Warzone. So I pulled out the Modern Warfare 2 benchmark to see how it would fare in that. This is with all high settings at 1440p. You can see that we averaged 196 FPS. 99% of the bottleneck is showing on the GPU, so that CPU is able to do a lot more than the GPU is right now. Last but not least, we jumped into an actual solo match on Warzone 2 to see what kind of real in-game FPS we were going to get on Warzone. After running around a lot in Al Mazrah City, we're averaging around 165 FPS. Again, this is 1440p, all high settings. After we ran the PC for a couple of days doing the benchmarks with this pre-treated distilled water, we felt that the loop was sufficiently pre-treated and ready to go, so it was time to drain the coolant. So after optimizing and overclocking the PC, we reran all the benchmarks, but we weren't totally happy with the results that we got. So we went back in and spent another 2 to 3 hours really just fine-tuning everything that we could in the BIOS, really fine-tuning the stability and everything on our overclocking. And then we reran the benchmarks again, and here's how it ended up. So you can see on Cinebench, it was obviously the best stock because when we overclocked, both for the overclock and the retweaking, we actually disabled half of the cores in the 7950X. So for a pure CPU benchmark, it's going to be a little bit lower. After that, we looked at our GPU performance. You can see we were using Superposition benchmark. Not a whole lot of difference between any of the three, either stock, overclocked, or after we retweaked. Either way, those are still pretty good scores, so we're pretty happy with that. On to the more important bits here. We're now going to look at some gaming performance. So we started out with Fortnite on all Epic settings. You can see on stock, we were around 80, 84 FPS. After the first overclocking, we were roughly the same with the same settings. And then after we spent a bunch of time retweaking, we were able to get that all the way up to about 125. When you bring the settings down to medium, you get a similar story. With the standard stock, we were at about 180. First overclocking in the 210, 220 range. A couple of tweaks to the settings. We were able to bump that with the retweaking all the way up into the 430 range. So this is basically medium settings on Fortnite with just a little bit of tweak on some of the cinematic stuff to really bring up that performance. Stock, the Modern Warfare 2 benchmark was right around 200 FPS with the 1% lows being all the way down to 88. After our initial overclocking, we were able to get that up to about 300 FPS with the lows, 1% lows being around 109. Finally, after we retweaked it, we were able to get up to about 345 FPS, which is awesome. And the 1% lows down at 117, which is totally playable. Then jumping into a solo match for Warzone 2, the initial game playing stock, the 1% lows were about 115 FPS, averaging around 160 FPS. After our initial overclocking, our 1% lows were about 120 FPS, with our average only going up to about 175, 180. With another retweaking we were in roughly the same area for the 1% lows being just a little bit lower and the overall average being about 175. So not a whole lot of difference there. Warzone 2 is not super well optimized, so not that surprised that our numbers were pretty inconsistent, but all in all, it's really solid gaming numbers there for pretty high settings at Warzone 2.
After seeing all the performance and the benchmarks, let's talk a little bit about the build overall, maybe what I would do differently next time, why I chose what I did, and why I decided to make this video. The reason why I did a build like this is one, just to show how beautiful open loop water cooling can be and how simple it can be to actually assemble. Because of this distribution plate and using all EK components in the whole system, it made for no bending and very little cutting of the tubes. This means this build probably took me about 1/3 of the time that it would have taken if I had used a standard pump reservoir combo. On top of that, I really wanted a not over the top RGB aesthetic. You'll see a lot of builds these days with 10 RGB fans, RGB power cables, tons of RGB all over. And I wanted to show that you can actually make a PC look way better with the right amount of RGB rather than unicorn vomit all over. Some things that I might do differently next time. First, I probably would have waited for the X3D model of the CPUs from AMD to come out, because in terms of gaming, they're far superior to their standard models. Second, if I needed to do any bending myself, I would not use the acrylic tubing that I have here. I would use PETG tubing. Or I would go completely the other end and go with metal tubes that are super difficult to bend but look absolutely amazing. I really enjoyed that industrial steampunk sort of look. And some other things just in build assembly that I learned in terms of putting in some of these water cooling components first rather than the standard putting the motherboard with the CPU and stuff on first. Putting that distro plate in while already having the motherboard and some other stuff in was absolutely difficult, and I had to redo a bunch of stuff. Same goes for some of the radiators. Would have been much easier to put in earlier in the build. And then as you saw, with trying to drain the loop, I would have installed the drain plug that is now installed at the beginning rather than after trying to drain the loop somewhat successfully. I also probably would have had this PC pre-sold rather than building it myself and then trying to find someone to buy it. So if you're interested, let me know. Last but not least, optimizing and overclocking the PC. This is something that I would choose to do every single time. While you'll see there's maybe not the biggest difference on some games with the overclocking and the optimization, it does create a lot of stability. And if you ever wanted to use this as a workstation, you could turn CDD2 back on, have access to all 16 cores, and you now have a 16-core overclocked workstation at the ready. The optimization and settings that Trap does also really helps keep the temperatures down on the components, which means this PC is going to last for a lot longer than if it had been bone stock. So I guess the big question is, would I do it again? Absolutely, I would totally do this again. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Make sure you're liking, subscribing, watch some of the other videos that we've done recently. I'll see you on the next one.